Welcome to iTTV for Form 3 Science, where we continue into the world of respiration. Today's lesson, structure of the lungs and the breathing mechanism. So far with our respiration, we've learned about the passage of air as it enters into our lungs. We've learned that it comes in through the nostrils, into the nasal cavity, then into our trachea, through the bronchus, into the bronchioles, and then the alveolus. Then from the alveolus, there was a gas exchange that occurred where oxygen entered into the blood and was carried away by red blood cells, and carbon dioxide did the reverse. It went from the red blood cells into the alveolus and then would have made its way out. Today we want to have a look a bit more at the system, focusing primarily on the thoracic cavity area, and then to have a closer look at our alveolus design and how it accommodates a very quick exchange of gas with the bloodstream. The lungs are made up of bronchus, bronchiole, alveoli, and blood capillaries. So these are the main components of our lungs. I read somewhere that there's over 25,000 kilometers of tubing, bronchus and bronchiole, in each lung. And this is to accommodate a large amount of gas entering and being able to be absorbed into our bloodstream. The thoracic cavity houses the lungs. This area here around where our lungs sit is called the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity basically has the lungs sitting inside it. The lungs are protected by a bony structure called the rib cage. So around the lungs, we have the rib cage sitting on the outside here. So its function is mainly to protect the lungs. The ribs surround the thoracic cavity. So imagine you've got a thoracic cavity. Inside your thoracic cavity are your lungs. Around the whole thoracic cavity is a rib cage that protects the lungs inside the thoracic cavity. The alveolus is where exchange of gases happens quickly and efficiently. Inside our lungs, right at the end of each of the bronchus, we have our alveoli sacs. We've got millions of alveoli sacs, and it's here that the exchange of gas takes place. Now that we've just introduced the thoracic cavity and the alveoli, let's try a few quick questions on what we've done. Where does exchange of gases happen in the lungs? So remember, they happen right at the end in these sacs. What are they called? Let's check the answer. The alveolus. So exchange of gases happens in the alveolus. Let's try another question. What surrounds the thoracic cavity? So remember, we have a thoracic cavity. We have something that goes all the way around it. That's there for protective purposes. Let's check the answer. The rib cage. The rib cage surrounds the thoracic cavity. Let's try one more question. What are the lungs made up of? So, think about it. The lungs are made up of 4 main things. Can you remember them? If you can remember 3, that's fantastic. Let's have a look at the answer. Bronchus, bronchiole, alveoli, and blood capillaries. So the lungs are made out of these 4 things. Now that we've gone through those questions, let's have a closer look at the alveolus, or the alveoli for more than one, and look at how it's adapted for gas exchange. The alveolus is specially designed for speedy gas exchange. So what we really need to do is go up to the board, draw out an alveoli for ourselves, and as we go through the main design features, discuss them. So in general, when we draw an alveoli, we have our bronchiole, and then we draw an alveoli like this. Notice that I'm drawing it so that the outer surface is folded. Gas comes in and gas goes out that way through the bronchiole. Now, the first design feature of the alveoli is an alveolus has the following adaptations. Has a very large surface area when compared to its volume. It has many folds. So the first thing is it's a very large surface area. So if we go back up to this diagram, you'll notice that when I drew the alveoli, I put in all these folds into it. Basically, by folding the alveoli, what we do is we increase its surface area. So it is folded. And why do we want it to be folded? Because we want to increase surface area. Very important to increase the surface area. More surface area, more oxygen is able to come out and go into the bloodstream. Now that we've had a look at the first adaptation, let's have a look at the next. Has walls which are 1 cell thick. This helps the oxygen cross into the blood as fast as possible. So the next adaptation of the alveoli that's unique is its cell wall. So over here, if what I do is I just remove a little bit of this wall over here is actually 1 cell thick, which means it's just 1 cell, followed by another 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 cell, like so. So by making it so thin, oxygen is able to cross into the blood very, very quickly. So if you imagine that on the outside here, this is our blood. Capillary. As the blood flows here, the oxygen can move into the capillary very quickly because this is just 1 cell thick. So remember, folded to increase the surface area, walls 1 cell thick. Now that we've had a look at 2 of the adaptations, let's move on to the third adaptation. Surrounded by many blood capillaries. This is so as much oxygen is absorbed as possible. So the next adaptation is the amount of blood that flows around alveoli. If we go back to the board over here, this alveoli, I'm going to redraw it just here in a smaller form. Imagine that it is surrounded by blood capillaries. The blood capillary comes in and then it spreads out and goes all the way around and then finally comes out on this end, like so. The whole idea is by having a lot of blood capillaries here, your oxygen doesn't have to go into one capillary, it can go into all the capillaries at the same time, and therefore we increase the amount of oxygen entering into the blood. So let's look at these adaptations. Folded to increase the surface area. Thickness, 1 cell thick. Many blood capillaries so the oxygen can be absorbed faster. So those are our 3 adaptations. Now we want to look at the last adaptation. It is moist. This helps dissolve oxygen and speed up the process of gas exchange. So this last adaptation is to deal with the moisture. If we go back to the diagram over here, The problem we have with oxygen is it's a gas, and it's very hard to get a gas to move from one area to the other area. So what we do is, inside the alveoli, we have a thin layer of moisture which is produced by mucus. Now, this thin layer of moisture helps to absorb the oxygen and then transfer the oxygen across into the blood more efficiently. So every time oxygen hits the mucus layer, it gets pulled in and it can't escape and fly around inside the alveoli. So the 4 adaptations are: number 1, folds to increase the surface area; number 2, one cell thick; number 3, many blood capillaries; and number 4, moisture to speed up oxygen transport. Those are the 4 adaptations of the alveoli. You do need to know them. It is a very common question in the examinations. Now that we've had a look at the alveoli, let's try a few questions on the alveoli. Why is the alveolus wall one cell thick? So remember, the whole idea of the alveoli's adaptations is to speed up oxygen moving into the blood. So if I was to ask you why the wall is one cell thick, the answer would be to speed up gas exchange. Remember, all the adaptations are designed to speed up gas exchange. Let's try another question. Why is the alveolus rich in blood capillaries? Now, once we get the oxygen into the blood, we want to take it away. But remember, we need large amounts of oxygen. So this is why, or this is the relationship between the capillaries and the oxygen. Let's check the answer. To help absorb as much oxygen as possible. So why do we have so many blood capillaries? To speed up the process of absorbing oxygen and to make sure we absorb as much oxygen as possible. So we've had a look at the thoracic cavity and the lungs. We've had a look at the alveolus and its special adaptations for gas exchange. Now let's have a look at the process by which oxygen or gas enters and leaves our lungs. How air enters the lungs? Air enters the lungs due to a change in pressure. I know we always think that we're actually breathing in and breathing out, and we are pulling the air in and pulling the air out, or pushing the air out, I beg your pardon. But in truth, we don't do that. Air enters and leaves our lungs automatically due to a change in pressure. What we do is we facilitate, which means we allow the pressure in our lungs to change, and that helps to move the air in or push the air out. When the volume in the thoracic cavity increases, the air pressure decreases. You must remember that the relationship between volume and pressure is opposite, meaning that if the volume increases, the pressure must do the opposite, which is decrease. The air pressure outside the thoracic cavity is greater than the pressure inside. Now, when you have a pressure difference, high pressure and low pressure, air must move from high pressure to low pressure. So the situation now is the air outside is high pressure, the air inside is low pressure. So this must mean that the air outside is going to move to the air area where the low pressure is. Air is pushed into the lungs. This process is called inhalation. So inhalation is when you breathe in. What about the reverse process? In exhalation, air is pushed out of the lungs due to reversing the process. So now we're going to reverse the process. Remember when we inhaled, the volume increased and the pressure decreased. If we are reversing the process, this means the volume must decrease and the pressure increase. The volume in the thoracic cavity decreases and the pressure increases, air is pushed out. So remember, in order to get air in and out of our body, what we do is we change the volume of our thoracic cavity. When the thoracic cavity volume is large, pressure is low, air enters. When the thoracic cavity volume is small, pressure increases and air is pushed out. Now that we've had a look at how the air enters, let's try a couple of questions on the topic. Why does air enter the lungs? Remember, if we are entering the lungs, the pressure outside must be higher than the pressure inside. If you have low pressure inside, the volume must be high or low. Let's check the answer. Due to a change in air pressure. How does air enter the lungs? Due to a change in air pressure. And we change this air pressure by playing with the volume inside the thoracic cavity. Describe the changes in volume and air pressure during exhalation. Now in exhalation, we want the air to come out. This means the air pressure inside must be higher than the pressure outside. How do you create high pressure inside your thoracic cavity? What do you need to do to the volume? Have you written your answer down? Let's have a look. The volume decreases and the air pressure increases. Air is pushed out of the lungs. So, remember, the volume and the pressure must be opposite to each other. If you want high pressure, you must have a small volume, and if you want low pressure, you need a larger volume. So remember the main things about this lesson. The thoracic cavity is where the lungs are housed. The alveolus has 4 major adaptations: surface area, 1 cell thick, layer of moisture, and a lot of blood capillaries. And finally, remember how air enters and moves out of our lungs. It's due to pressure change. The pressure change is related to the volume of the thoracic cavity. Larger volume, lower pressure; smaller volume, higher pressure. That's all the time we have for today's lesson. Thank you for watching iTTV.